Hello, everybody. Come on in. Come on in. Hope you enjoy that fancy. Look at this. The miracles of modern technology. Yes, indeed. Come on in. Let's see who we've got on. Hi, Elwin. Yes. Countdown timer. And now I got to get music to it. That's the next thing. Yes, Matt. I'm getting all fancy. Hi, Peggy. It has snowed in Springdale, James. Not right now. Fancy pants. Actually shorts, Troy. But that's more than you want to know. Hello, Shelley. Hello, Roddy. Nice and, only minus 15. Good. Hi, Trudy. Hi, Raymond and Patricia. Hi, Alvin. Hi, Alan. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Barbara. Happy Valentine's Day to you. Yes, Chad, I am. We are all fancy here today. We're all fancy. Hi, Blair. Good to have you in. And Sheena. Heather. First, you rescued me from Super Bowl. Now, Valentine's entertainment. Yes, well, I'm doing what I can for the Saints. Come on in, folks. Invite friends if you know there's somebody into these topics. Come on in. Hello, Joel. Hello, Sharon. This is ever true. Let me see where I got Sheena and Alvin, Heather, Joel, Sharon, Glenda, Janice. Good to have you. Glenda's in St. John's. Hi, Bethany. I'm glad to provide some weekly care for you. Hi, Tanya and Gloria. and Sandra is on. How do you and Uncle Bill? Hi, Mark and Sharon and Gander. Heather, you got, yes, I do. Jesus and John Wayne. I'm putting that there to advertise it, but I haven't read it yet. Hi, Steve Bursey is on. Good evening, Herb. Hi, Desiree. Great to have you on. Hi, Mark. In Grand Falls, Judy, happy Valentine's Day to you. Christy is on. David Crawlis in Winona. Hi, David. Hope you're doing well. Bethany, I need all kinds of help. PowerPoints are the least of my trouble. That's one of the things I understand. Hi, Hannah. Good evening, Mark. Hope you're doing well. Faye and Wade are on in the big land. Jaws theme music. I had Bittersweet Symphony on earlier, but I couldn't figure out how to get it through the system. So that's something I got to work on. Matt Collins. Yeah, that's true, Matt. Hi, Roland, Daphne, and Loretto. Edna. Oh, it's jumping around on me here. 1 second, folks. I scroll back up. Here we go. Edna and Wayne are on. Hannah. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Matthew. Hi, Paul. Hi, Alexa. Hope you're doing real well. The love of God, how rich and pure. I was listening to that today, Sean. I should, David, indeed get a live band going here to do me an intro. Valerie is on. Kate and John got their Doritos and Pepsi. That'll be coming up for me later. Karen is on. Hi, Keith Vincent. Good to have you on. James, I've not read it yet, so I can tell you that the cover is very lovely. Apart from that, I can't help you yet. Beverly is on. Lorna, good to have you on. Hi, Amanda Parsons. Great to have you on. Hi, Mark. Hi, Paul. Thank you for that vote of confidence, sir. Hi, Golda. Happy Valentine's Day to you and Lewis. Lovebirds. Hi, Tina. Tina's out in Calgary. Just listening because she's had eye surgery. Actually, the very best way I look is on the radio. So if you can just listen, you are doing just fine. Hi, Gerald and Kelly and Sylvia and Verna and Nina, Dulcie, Janice, Sherry, Ryan, Roberta. Happy Valentine's Day to you, and you're lovely. I understand he's working, just like Melinda's working tonight. Hi, Audrey. Craig, Giles is on. Hi, Job. Hello, Candace Nickel. Hope you're doing real well. Hi, Marilyn. Hope you're doing great. Jamie and Kara. I'd say that's Kara. Hi, Kara. Always good to have you on. Hi, Marjorie. Hello, Steve and Carla, or Steve or Carla. Hello, Donna. Hello, Aunt Penny, Mother, Florence. Hello, June and Cornerbrook and Melissa and Junior. Hello, Cindy. Good to have you on. And Amy. I'm going to now take a minute to invite my couple of guests. So that's done. Hello, Glenda and Marg and Beulah. Hope you're all doing well. We'll wait another couple of minutes. There's a couple of hundred of us on now. If, again, if you know if somebody's interested in these topics, by all means, share if you're comfortable or reach out on a text and let them know we're live. And they may benefit from this. Hello, Marg and Beulah. Hi, Faith O'Coin up in the big land. I hope you're doing real good. I'm glad to have you on. Time to switch mugs out. Hello, Gail in Bedford. That's very kind of you to say. That's Bedford's a lovely spot. I've been there many times. Hello, Dwight out in Waterloo. Hello, Alan. Hello, Angela and Rebecca. Trudy's in Cornerbrook. Algon and Olive are in Steadybrook. Hi, John up in Fort Tow. Hope you're doing well. Hello, Dan. Hello, Dwayne. Hope you're doing really good. Shirley Thomas, can't wait to hear what you have to say. I can't wait to hear what I got to say either. It's because it's not all planned. Hello, May. Jessica Woods is on. Hello, Lorraine. Cal and Karen are on. That is good. Keep coming in, folks. We'll wait another bit. Yeah, Caleb's missing class because we're on reading week this week. It's this week coming, so Caleb is going to be bereft of my presence online, so he's now tuning in. It's very kind of you to say, Caleb. Hello, Archie. Good to have you on. Kelsey, if the shirt behind you is up for an advertisement, I'd like to place an order. I actually got a spare one of them, Kelsey, because 2 came by mistake, so we'll see what we can do for you. Hello, Gloria. Mark needs something positive tonight. The Habs won last night. Yeah, I don't know, Mark, boy. That's a really hard thing to overcome. Hello, Jamie Lee. Good to have you on. Hi, Chantel. Kara loves the shirt. I kind of think you would, Kara. Hi, Tara. My reminder alarm went off at 8:50, Deidre says, to get our coffee and settle in for another evening of story time with Father Noel. Yes, well, that's about what this is, isn't it? That's good. Let's wait another couple of minutes for folks to join us. This is Valentine's Day, as you know, so folks might be otherwise celebrating. Let me answer a message here. Keep coming in. There's somebody with a message now for another mug. Thank the Lord, I'm all about the mugs. Let's see who we got. We got Roxanne Andrews. Hi to you and Gary in the city. Hope you're doing really, really well. Hi, Shirley. First-time caller. Praise God. Keith Poole is on. Oh, we've got Keith and Roberta on, but Keith is away working and Roberta is on live, and the two of them are spending their Valentines, joined, as it were, by this show. I mean, I am just providing the service here of St. Valentine myself. I can't think of a more romantic way to spend the evening. Let's see. Stan is on. Hi, Stan. And Carrie is on. Kathy Robinson, happy Valentine's to you and your sweetheart. Yes, it would be nice to have another steak in Florida. We were in Florida with Lauren and Kathy a couple of years ago now, I suppose, and would be very good to be back. Hello, Peter and Dolores and Riley. Hope you're well. Hello, Trevor Tucker. I am sup. This is it. Hello, Terry. Hello, Jared. Happy Valentine's Day to you and Crystal, my friend. Hope you're doing well. Jonathan, hello, Barry. Hello, Patsy. Hi, Wanda. Hazel and Willie. Well, folks, tonight I am breaking out a brand new mug. You've seen it online, maybe. Yes, indeed. There's so much to be said in that mug. I saw it online. Some of you shared it. I just had to have it. I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. Okay, let's get this show started. See how much trouble I'm going to have here. Now, just like that. Can you imagine the wonders of technology? These are our topics tonight. We are looking at babies in the church. We are going to then look at depression and demons with a couple of special guests that I have. And I'm going to start off then with some teaching on the spiritual gifts. So that is where we are headed tonight, and should be a good time. As you may know, this is Valentine's Day, and there we go. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. My lovely is on a 12-hour shift. I think she's just gotten off. She was in Emerge for 12 hours today, and yeah, so I'm missing her out here. And I know you're wondering what I did for her for Valentine's, and my level of romantic is like way off the charts. So my gift to her for this Valentine's was, I told her if she checked her account, I've paid her tuition for med school for this semester. So listen, if you need tips on romance, by all means, I'm your man. So, you know, so don't not be romantic because you don't know how. Your boy here is, I'm happy to help. Yes, indeed. Let's see. Hi, Marilyn. Good to have you on. Thank you, Glenda and Alexa. Yeah, this is a great mug. I'm gonna enjoy this one on the show here, I gotta say. Tia, we are getting fancier here on the old show all the time. I tell you what, and if I can pull this off, anybody can. Hello, Joy. And let's see. Carla came out and said, you want to put Brad on the big screen? Yeah, that's all I need now to be blown up to 52 inches. Hi, Eileen. Good to have you on. What a better way to spend Valentine's Day. See, Dave, this is actually it. Just you and Kirsty and me and 291 people right now. I mean, you can't get it no better than that, Dave. Okay, just by way of a reminder for you all, I'll show you a little something else here. I keep getting asked about this. This is where I am on YouTube. You can find my channel the same way you found me on Facebook, Bradley Truman Noel. You can subscribe or not subscribe, but there are all kinds of videos there. If you click on the video link that you see there right next to the home, there are all kinds of videos. There's probably 100 or more videos there now on all kinds of topics. And there are also a couple of series on there. I did one on Jesus in the Four Gospels. And I also did one which is relevant to tonight on Pentecostal spirituality. And that's actually one I did at a family camp. And there I worked through all of 1 Corinthians. And I mentioned that to you because I have done food offered to idols, as you know. And that's where I finished. That's where I go through the whole book of Corinthians, and I include that teaching. So, yeah, if you are interested in that, by all means, check it out on YouTube, Bradley Truman Noel. So, let's see what we've got. Romance runs in the Noel men. Yes, I got no doubt about that, Aunt Sandra. Hello, Tony, out in Thompson. Hello, Wayne. Hope you're doing well. They say you can't buy love. Well, I'm trying to buy it with tuition money. I am blown up on Trudy's TV. I can't imagine how nasty that must be. Hello, Ruby. Nina's got us blown up on a 65. Jared's got us on a 42-inch. Jared's TV is smaller because he's in the pastorate, and so they don't make any money, as you know. And Byron is out in Fort McMurray. So our first topic tonight is babies in the church. Let you have a real good look at it there. And we're going to do 3 tonight. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to do babies in the church. Then I'm going to invite a couple of special guests on to talk about mental health issues. And then we are going to move to the gifts of the Spirit. Perhaps before I do this, I should cover the week's news, I suppose. Mr. Trump now has the distinction of being the most acquitted president in U.S. history. So that's something to brag about, I suppose. He was acquitted again this week. And yeah, so he can now say, I am the most acquitted president in U.S. history. So that's kind of interesting. And if you're in Newfoundland, you'll know that we are now back to level 5. We've had a bit of an outbreak of COVID in the province, and our long-suffering chief medical officer has, she's put us right back to where we were last March or April, I suppose. So, you know, there are 5 warning levels for us in Newfoundland, and as I've seen online, level 5 in Newfoundland basically means the arse is gone right out of her. So that's where we are right now. The arse is out of her, people. So we're kind of locked down again here. And, but the trends are encouraging. Our cases have been down again today from yesterday, from the day before. So that's a good sign. So all of you who are in Newfoundland and are a little discouraged by having to go back, take heart. I think this is going to pass again soon. And in the meantime, we're going to do our best to pay attention to the protocols given us and hope that this thing passes quickly and we get back to some level of freedom. Okay, lots of people. Oh, Jeremy Sims is on. Jeremy, you're the only one of the Sims I've noticed on tonight. I don't know where your brothers are. Tim and Rochelle is on a plane. Well, that's impressive, Tim. And you're going somewhere cold. I have no sympathy for you, Tim. It's 8 below here now. Yes, let's keep Dr. Fitzgerald in our prayers. Would love to see Doc and Fitzgerald in a conversation. I expect she's too busy. Stephen Sims. Hey. Good to have you on. Tim, I expect you may not know it, but I expect you've met them. Let me just say. Okay. How's that? Somebody will translate for you. Oh, and there's my mother on. Okay, let me start my first topic. I showed you this earlier, getting a little ahead of myself. Babies in the church. And the idea behind this is some teaching I like to do from Ephesians 4 on gifts that Jesus gives. And it's where we get the 4 or 5-fold ministry from. It's traditionally been said to be the 5-fold ministry: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. The Greek kind of leads us to believe that it's really only 4. It's apostles, prophets, evangelists, and the pastor teacher, from the way it's worded. But it's a fairly well-known passage. And I'll put it on the screen for you here now through the wonders of modern technology. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. And we get right in this passage, actually, the role of pastors. Christ himself gave these different ministries, but for our purposes tonight, we're going to look at pastors. Maybe another time I'll take a look at apostles and prophets in the modern church. But this is the role of the pastor. It says right here, I've put it in big red letters for you, to equip his people for works of service. Another translation says, to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Now, this is the primary role of pastors. And it's long been my contention that in some cases we have a model of the pastorate that's not all that healthy. And the model that we've kind of grown around us in the last I don't know, 50 years is one of consumerism. And by that I mean that we have the pastors in the front doing the show, as it were, in a service, and the congregation sitting there more as an audience. And you'll notice that even in our preaching resembles very much something like a lecture. The pastor talks, and in many congregations, very few people even give feedback. Whereas preaching could easily be a give and a take, where the pastor is preaching or teaching and people are asking questions or giving plenty of feedback. So there's this give and take. But I think what's happened is, and there's a long history to this, and it comes back to consumerism, and it comes back to the rise of wealth among baby boomers. We now have our professional paid clergy, as it were, our pastors, and we have our audience. And this is not serving us really, really well. And so what's happening is that instead of the pastors equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry, the pastors end up doing the work of the ministry. And you'll get a lot of this pastors doing all of the various ministries. Now, what happens is pastors will, of course, ask for volunteers. Can we give volunteers for the kids ministry? Can we give volunteers for the youth ministry? And one thing and another. But we've had this trend towards where people in the congregation are more like an audience rather than full participants. And my contention is that you've gotten to the place where Pastors are busy doing the work of the ministry, so they don't have time to properly prepare the saints, to equip the saints. Because the saints are not properly equipped, the pastor must do the work of the ministry. And it's like running on a wheel. And this has not been a good trend in the church. I'm fond of saying that in the church, there are really no spectators. The only time spectators are mentioned in the Bible, some of you will have heard me say this, is when Hebrews talks about the great cloud of witnesses. And the way you get in the great cloud of witnesses is that you did. Those are folks on the other side who are cheering us on. You don't get to be a spectator in the kingdom, in the congregation. It's all hands on deck all the time. And the pastor's role is really to be equipping saints to do the work of the ministry. Now, if you look back at this, what you will see is a whole pile of positives when this happens, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the measure of Christ, the whole measure of Christ. Then he goes on to say, we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as you notice that there each part does its work. So if you look at the benefits from following the model that God gives, you have unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God. You have maturity. We're no longer infants. We're not blown here and there. We're speaking the truth in love. We grow up into become the mature body of Christ as everyone does his and her part. Now, this is God's model. This is God's model for growth. And what I like to say is that when God gives us a model, God blesses his model. God don't bless our model. So if we're in a situation in our congregations where the people are kind of sat back and say, well, you know, that's what we're paying you for. It comes out of a consumeristic mindset where we're paying the pastor. That's why we got to, and so we buy what we need. You need help with the youth, you buy a youth pastor. You need help with the children, you hire a children's pastor. It's a lot of you, if you had money, you'd hire a worship pastor. We've hired visitation pastors. And the idea is, well, we got a visitation pastor. That's their job. If you have a visitation pastor, the role should be training people properly in how to visit so that the body is involved in visitation. All of us. Because it's the pastor's role to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. So let me pause here for a minute and let's see who's on, see if you have any questions. Harry and Betty are up in Burntberry. Wayne Rose watched the Salvation Army service today talking about those two young girls in the U.S. agrees with your theory if Jesus was on earth. I don't know what that mean, Wayne, unfortunately. Contractual pastors, that's basically it, Richard. Hello to Eugene and Joy. Orain Johnson, I tried talking about this some times ago, and one pastor asked, what do you think I'm paid for? Well, I can tell you, Orain, what you're paid for. You're paid to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Graham, I think the model comes out of consumerism. It arose really with the baby boomer generation because for the first time in North America, they had a lot of disposable income and they got used to buying things that they wanted. And so, yeah, I think that's where it comes from. So when you need something in the church, you pay for it. Dwight, even when there's involvement, it's often the same few members that volunteer to help the pastor, not the body by and large. That's right. We need to get to a place in the next 25 years where we have every member ministry. Absolutely. Thanks, folks. Keep the comments coming. I've heard it said that pastors are not in ministry but are equippers. The people are in the ministry. The pastors equip them. That is very, very good, Lauren. Let's see. Oh, we're skipping around here. Tim, perhaps developed from the Catholic model and the reemergence of the Old Testament priestly class. I think that's probably true. Hannah, equipping takes time and the church wants immediate results. That's true. See, this is another cultural piece. Not only are we into a consumeristic mentality, we're into a very instant mentality. We like our things fast. And as I'm fond of saying, we like to microwave, but God likes to marinate. And if you've ever had a steak, you may well know that marinating is much better than microwaving. We're going to have to teach this, Hannah. And while you teach it, you're going to have to both equip the saints and do some of the work of the ministry while people are trained. I should also stop here and say that if you're a specialist, like a youth specialist or a children's specialist, there are certain things you're going to do because you're hired for your knowledge and abilities with teens and youth. But even having been hired for your abilities in those particular situations, you still need to be equipping the saints. So you're equipping in your children's ministry, you're equipping your leaders, but you're also equipping the kids to do the work of the ministry in their own context. If you're a youth pastor, you're equipping your leadership team, but you're also equipping the teenagers to be the light of Jesus in their contexts. So you're going to do a little of the work of the ministry, but you always have to have an eye to equipping. So Hannah, you're going to have to teach this and model it till they get the truth of that. Let's see. Now I'm going to come back to a couple of comments. Let me show you this again. So that's the positive, but just watch what happens when we don't follow God's pattern. We do not reach unity in the faith or the knowledge of the Son of God. We don't become mature. We remain as infants, which is where my title comes from. We are tossed to and fro by every new trend and doctrine, and we're not able to speak the truth in love, and we don't grow up to become the mature body of Christ. This is what happens when you miss God's pattern and you have an audience with the pastors as performers and the pastors doing all of the work of the ministry. We end up without unity. We end up immature. We stay as infants. We chase every trend that's going on, tossed to and fro by every new trend and wind of doctrine. I mean, can you not see the North American church in this? This is the indictment. This is what happens when we don't follow God's pattern, when the pastors don't do the work of the ministry. Now, let's see. From my observations, Alan says, some pastors are so concerned about their reputations, they won't let people do any major ministry in the church. Let me talk about that for a minute. I think, unfortunately, that's true. And it may be their reputations, but I'm also aware that pastors can be insecure, just like anyone else can be insecure, really. And I've long been fond of saying to students, there is nothing as poisonous to a successful ministry as insecure leaders. So a challenge to you who are pastors and leaders in other areas of life. If you find that you get threatened because somebody does something a little better than you, and you then make efforts to make sure they don't shine, then your ministry, your own ministry, is going to be curtailed. What you really need to do is find people who excel in all kinds of areas, and then as the leader, set them free. Now, it might mean that you've got people in your congregation who can preach better than you. Maybe your staff does. Maybe you've got people who can lead worship better than you or can serve in other ways better than you. And that is a little hard on the flesh, as the Bible would say. But it's imperative that we wrestle insecurity to the ground. And when we've gathered people around us, that we set them free to do the work of the ministry. So one of the reasons why this model is not always in effect is because we have leaders sometimes who are insecure and they can't have the saints doing work of the ministry. They have to do it all themselves. And that's really unfortunate. After I did deacon-possessed churches a few weeks ago, I had somebody reach out to me and say, why don't you do one on pastor-possessed churches? Because our pastor won't let us do anything. And so again, a challenge to leaders, pastors and other leaders. We really do need to identify the gifts that God has given us in the congregation and absolutely set them free, let them thrive. And if they're better than we are at things, then we're going to look good for having raised them up, and we're going to look good for having set them free, if that's our worry. So, yeah. When pastors want to do everything themselves, they leave the church without training people. Yes, that happens often. So many people in the church setting have been hurt by a pastor's insecurity and left. That's sadly true. That is good. It is good, I believe, to apply both inside and outside the church. This is not just for pastors. The opportunities for ministry are many, Taylor says. I realize they can only do so much. I suspect that's what she's finishing with there. Caleb's very interesting because in Newfoundland, there's such a large emphasis on the pastor that if a widow, say, or an older couple doesn't give visits, it doesn't feel good enough if they weren't enough for pastor. That's true, Caleb. That's a very good point. So what we need to train our people that it's not the pastor's role, because some people will say, well, yeah, if I don't get a visit from the pastor, it didn't count. Well, we've got to teach people that it's the pastor's role to be equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry. Jacqueline, good to have you on, and Sheldon too, perhaps. I remember when I was in Bible college in Bill Morrow saying a pastor's job is to be continually working himself out of a job by training people to do what they should be doing. Absolutely. That's good, people. Keep coming. Yes, Lisa, it is a control issue. Heather says someone else's gifts and success is something for us to celebrate. That's exactly how I see it. Have you witnessed a biblical model or very close to it? I have in some contexts, Bram. I've certainly tried to model it in the group I've had on campus. I try to identify students who are gifted in things and set them free to do it, and try to let them lead and be creative, and me to be there as a fallback. I don't know how successful I've been, but that is what I have tried. A wise pastor once told me that the sign of good pastoral leader is to effectively delegate the work. True. Non-pastoral leaders in the church expect the pastor to do the ministry rather than train. Yeah, we'd rather hire than do. That's an attitude problem. See, Lauren, that's where I think we are. Pernell, I volunteered under pastors that worked to enable what I was involved with. I was able to grow. I've also volunteered under pastors that micromanaged. Yep, it will leave volunteers feeling unneeded. And that's why if you're in the clergy, my dear friends, we've got to wrestle any self-esteem issues or insecurities really to the ground. We really do. Paul, a great leader will surround themselves with people that will make them look good. Finding those people is a gift. Absolutely. I know a staff pastor that had done such a good job equipping people in their particular area of the ministry. They were let go by the church because people thought they weren't busy enough. See, that's unfortunately, Justin, that's poor teaching. Right? One man says the success of a pastor is not seen by how much work he does, but by how less he has to do after a period of time. That's right. I should be able to train a group, and I've been very successful at this at Tyndale, although I only have them for 3 years. If I had them for much longer, I wouldn't be needed at all. They're sharp. They're willing to work. They're willing to do ministry, and you give them some training and you set them free, and then you just watch them grow. But pastors, listen, they won't grow and they won't thrive and they won't learn to bear the weight of the responsibility until they have it. And I'm not just wanting to rag on pastors here, because folks in the congregation, I know our pastors are tired to death of pleading for volunteers in some cases. And so again, I say to you, this is an every member ministry. This is all hands on deck. Very sad the way the church runs is a good thing. God works constantly through the congregation. Very exciting when you see young and old acting and being equipped like they should. Absolutely. Having the pastor do all the work leads to burnout, which is a significant issue. It absolutely is. Jamie Warren, I'm pretty sure I could leave my church for 3 months and the ministry would continue to flow smoothly. I expect if Jamie's board is watching, he probably doesn't need as much income as you're paying him. Probably now time to cut him back because he's got the job done there. Why are we still hiring worship youth and children's pastors? Have we made a mistake with this model? That's a good question, Kathy. There's actually a lot of research done on the youth ministry model in particular. The theory is that for youth and children, you may need specialists who understand, say, the development of children or understand the development of teenagers. And that's really why they're there, to provide kind of specialized ministry to a couple of age groups that you kind of do have to have some solid knowledge of their world to really do effectively, or you got to learn it somehow. I would think worship pastors are maybe in a different category than that, as certainly would be visitation pastors. There you go. Jamie, Caitlin has thrown you a bouquet. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if you got anything else on that, but I'll show you this one more time. When we don't follow this biblical model, we end up without unity, without knowledge. We don't become mature. We stay as infants. I mean, Paul here, this is a terrible indictment of following our own model. We're tossed to and fro, and I mean, there's a lot of this going on in the North American church. We're not able to speak the truth in love, and we don't grow up to become the mature body of Christ. So let me see now. I'm going to invite my guests again to make sure they got the invitation. Give me a second here. There we go. Okay. Erica, if you're on, that should come to you shortly. I see Rebecca is joining me, and we'll shift topics shortly. Let's see. Thank you, Kathy. I can see how worship pastors being specialized in spiritual health, therapeutic musicality, and community health specialization. That is true. And Jamie is going to Mars with John. Yes, well, you have to find out first, Jamie, if John believes in those kinds of things, because John is one of these conspiracy people. Okay. Let me shift to my next topic, which is depression and demons. I'm just waiting now for Erica to show up. Here's where we want to go with this. I'm not going to park too much on the demonic right now. I'm going to do that as another session, actually. But I do want to start off by talking a little bit about sickness and the demonic. And what you discover is that the Bible actually doesn't link sickness and the demonic very often. You see there the verse on your screen now, Matthew 12:22. Matthew 12:22. You have a demon-oppressed man who was blind and mute and was brought to him. And this is a fairly common way that the Bible does it. The Bible will say, this person had a sickness and they were oppressed by a demon. And it tends most often to separate it. The exception is this verse, which is kind of the parallel to Luke 14. It says, and this is a very odd way to put it, Jesus was driving out a demon that was mute. And when the demon left, the man who had been mute spoke, and the crowd was amazed. And Luke does that. Scholars are not quite sure why. It actually attributes the muteness to demons, which implies that the possessed person, now again, this is not Christians who merely experience oppression. This is somebody who was fully demon possessed, and for whatever reason, the Bible here attributes the sickness or the muteness to the demon being mute, and Jesus, of course, cast him out. But normally, this is the way it looks like this. Jesus goes through Galilee, he teaches in their synagogues, he proclaims the good news, he heals every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria. And watch how it does it. People brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. This is the most common way that the Bible deals with sickness, is to say there were those suffering from various diseases and also some demon-possessed persons. Again, and I can get into this more if I do a topic maybe on angels and demons. I don't believe Christians can be demon-possessed, so these are people who are not believers, and they have been possessed, and Jesus delivers them the same way he heals sickness. But my point is here to say the Bible doesn't often connect sickness and the demonic. Now, sadly, there is a long history in the church of really a negative stigma, as you may know, towards mental illness. And this topic was actually spurred to my thinking by somebody who wrote me and said that people were telling them that because they had depression, that it was all demons. And see, that's a terrible thing to be telling people. And the reason I started this way is to say the Bible rarely connects sickness with the demonic. And when it does, it's people who are totally possessed, not believers who are struggling with their mental health. We've actually experienced this in our own family. This is a picture here of, I'll make it a little bigger for you, of my great aunt. This would be my grandmother's sister, who was a pastor and struggled with her own mental health all of her life. And 2 days after my birthday, actually, so 50 years ago this year, took her own life one day after doing her devotions. And certainly not demonic, but she had struggled her whole life with her mental health. And so I wanted to start off by saying that this stigma that's in the church is really tremendously unfortunate. And I brought along a couple of people. Here they are. Some of my favorites. Let's see. Let me get y'all sorted out here. Here we go. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
And we can hear you. Oh, yes.
Hello. Hey.
Well, nobody is more shocked than I am that this actually worked. But I appreciate Mrs. Rebecca Dillon and Mrs. Erica Lush joining us. I had both of them in our program at Tyndale, and now Rebecca actually serves as the coordinator of the Pentecostal Studies program at Tyndale. and she's long since graduated, but she works kind of as my assistant, which, as you might know, is an incredibly difficult job. Try to keep my life on track. And she has started some studies in counseling. And you want to say hi to us, Rebecca? Tell us just a bit about yourself.
Sure, yeah. I did my undergrad at Tyndale, so I did a double major in biblical studies with the NIFI program and then psychology. And now I'm doing a Master of Arts in counseling through Providence.
Cool. Good for you. And Erica, tell us what you are doing and do a little promo for yourself.
Outside of taking care of my 4 really young children, which is a full gig as it is,
Oh, absolutely.
I am currently walking into my 5th year of my private practice. So I have been running my own counseling therapy practice out right now virtually. So all of my clients have moved to the virtual world with me with the situation that COVID has brought us to. But about 5 years into that, so working with people on a whole pile of spectrum of challenges and presenting issues. So that's where my life has brought me in the current days.
Cool. So, yeah, so this is free promo. If you're out there and you need some professional counseling, Erica, this is what she does. Rebecca is still training, but this is what Erica does. So if you need the contact, let me know by all means, because we all from time to time need some counseling. And Erica practiced on trying to counsel me. And if you can do that, you can do anything. Cody cooks, she counsels. It's a wonderful deal. I am who I am today, both in terms of my waist size and my mental health, Cody and Erica. Rebecca, tell me a little bit about your own journey with mental health and what you've picked up being in the church.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my journey started when I went to university. And I never was a person who thought that I struggled with any sort of mental health issue. Everyone, considered me like the happy-go-lucky person. And so when it came down to, what was happening with me and feeling panic attacks and stuff like that, at first I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, I think I'm having like a heart attack or asthma, something's happening, I need to go to the doctor. And after, going through the right challenges and avenues to get to where I had a diagnosis, and they diagnosed me with anxiety. I remember talking to someone and they quoted Philippians, 4:6, when it's like, do not worry about anything, pray about everything. Because this was the time when I was trying to really figure out if I should take medicine and like if I was going to take medication for my mental illness. And I remember hearing that quote and being like, yeah, but I pray about everything already. Like I do pray about it. Exactly. And so I was just really discouraged. I felt like people in the church didn't understand that it was something that I felt like was kind of out of my control. And that gave a bad taste in my mouth, starting off with mental health in the church, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Erica, you got any experience on the other side of this? Like how would you characterize that?
It's interesting because as I was thinking about like the topic of depression in the church, I actually have noticed that there isn't a whole pile of difference in our culture. That the stigma around mental health, specifically depression, is something that I feel church-wise and culture-wise is very poorly understood. People don't really know how to approach it. They don't know how to talk about it. I feel that a lot of my conversations had led me into understanding that people don't really know what to do with a family member or a friend or a loved one who's struggling. That we have failed in a lot of avenues as a church and as a society in really bringing awareness and support to our friends and our loved ones who are facing mental health challenges.
So what would you, keep going there, Erica, what would you recommend to people? How do they start bringing support to others?
When we're looking specifically at depression, it's a little bit of a twofold world. So two angles that I tend to like to look at it is an angle of, first you look at the primary experiencer. So this is the person who is struggling themselves, and a big piece with this is the identity of it. You know, oftentimes a mental health challenge becomes the person's story. It's like, hello, my name is Erica, I'm depressed. And that tends to be kind of the name tag that they wear, but we need to approach them as a holistic person. They are still a potential father and a friend and a mother and a sister who loves to bake and hike and ride their bike, for example. So we need to see them as a whole individual. And a big piece in what it looks like to help the person who's experienced or living with this is connection. Health is in connection. And oftentimes when we are struggling with depression, we will isolate. And it puts us in a space where we don't want to burden people, where oftentimes, you know, we may feel like people don't understand. A very common thing to see within depression is a numbness, where if we ask somebody, oh, how are you doing? They don't know how to describe it because they feel nothing. And telling someone that you feel nothing can be a very daunting thing to say. So oftentimes we cover it with, oh, I'm fine. Health is in connection. So for those of you who know somebody who struggles, you know somebody who's facing this, please seek to connect with them in other areas of their lives. Don't just focus on their mental illness, but focus on them as a whole individual and connect. The second kind of twofold part of that is for the family members and the people who are the direct support. So we're looking at the spouse or the brother or sister, or, you know, the parent of a child who's struggling. They're the inner circle of support. And this is maybe a little bit of a shout out to the church world as well, where if you know that there's a congregation member in your assembly who's struggling, touch base with their spouse, touch base with their parent, touch base with their brother or sister who's living in that home, because oftentimes their struggle is also just as intense, even though they are not the primary experiencer of it. But it tends to be a mental health challenge that we carry as families and we carry as units, not just as individuals. So bring encouragement holistically to people and their homes. And instead of asking someone, you know, why do you feel this way? Or how is it that you feel this way? Ask someone, how can I support you? Ask someone, what do you need? Because that can be a more direct question than expecting someone who's struggling with depression to find words to explain what oftentimes they don't even understand.
Good. That's excellent. Rebecca, what have you found that worked for you? Like, what are your go-tos for good mental health?
I think one thing that is important, and I'm just going to go off of what Erica said for a second first. Before you can reach out to someone, you have to be like aware that they have a mental health issue. And there's so much shame and so much embarrassment that people feel when it comes to being in the church and struggling with mental health, that we need to make it a conversation regardless of if someone's struggling or not, because people need to be aware. Right? Like, it's easy to talk about if you know someone is struggling and you can say like, how are you doing, and talk to them. But if you don't know, you can't reach out. And people think like, you know, in the midst of your struggle, being a Christian, can God use me? Is it possible? Like, am I a bad Christian, or am I being punished because I'm feeling this way? And it's important to have those conversations so that you can, you know, be that person who is the support. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. And what do you find is good? So let me talk to you both now about your own mental health. What types of things do you practice personally that contribute to good mental health?
Like coping mechanisms?
Yeah. How do you cope? How do you cope working for me?
Well, that's a struggle. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's not talk about all the alcohol. Let's go with coping things.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person. For me, like coping mechanisms would be just like going for a walk, like clearing my head, getting out in fresh air is something that really helps my mental health. Like I'm not the type of person who can stay home and be inside all day. And especially with COVID, so many people are struggling with their mental health because they're stuck inside. And, we're meant to be in relationship and, be out and in relationship with people and doing things. And I think right now, my best coping would be getting outside.
Okay, that's good. Just give me a second here. Now there's a question. Erica, is it possible that every person alive experiences depression at some level?
I think an important piece for us to understand when it comes to a topic of depression is we can't confuse depression and sadness. I think we will all feel sad, and I think our mood and our emotions and our feelings will fluctuate, depending on what your situation of life looks like, depending on the weather, oftentimes the season that we're in, depending on if you've just experienced a form of loss and there's grief that could be happening for you. So sadness is something that I would say, yes, it's a very common human emotion that some of us will feel more intensely than others, that some of us may even feel more frequently than others. When it comes to depression, however, we do want to be able just to have a little bit of caution around what that looks like, because no, not everybody will experience depression. Depression, and if you're someone who's working with a professional, there's a criteria that we actually walk through with individuals to confirm if depression is something that they are facing or not. And it tends to look very consistent with a certain baseline of where your mood is staying and for how long of a period of time you are experiencing that. So there is criteria that we follow to say, oh, maybe this is a season of depression for you. But sadness, I would say, yes, something we all have in seasons at different levels for different reasons. And it's a very common human emotion for us.
Good. Okay, that's great. This has been very helpful. One of you can take this. Do you think the old saints of the church would start thinking, if a psychologist was on staff, that the church has God playing second fiddle? I don't know if you know what L1 means there, but it's the idea that, especially from a Pentecostal background, that all you need to do is take your burden to the altar and leave them there. And then you should be feeling better, and your anxiety should go away, and your depression should go away.
That's such a common, theme in Newfoundland specifically, and I'm not hating on Newfoundland churches, don't get me wrong. Love them. But here, especially with the older congregations, people aren't as educated about mental health, because back in the day, it was still a thing. People still struggled. They just weren't aware of what to label it or what to call it. And so I think that it could be portrayed that way, that you bring it to a counselor and you seek counseling and you try and get help from that person as opposed to getting help from God. But they go hand in hand, if that makes sense. I don't know, Erica, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I'll add to that, because I also have grown to have an understanding that somebody who is facing a season of depression or is journeying through depression, it also is a very spiritual thing. So I'm a little bit I think that the church has not done due diligence to understand mental health, to teach on mental health, to have healthy, constructive conversations around mental health. But I don't know if we've done it as a society either. But depression is a very spiritual journey, because it's very common for somebody who is struggling to feel hopeless, to feel like things as if what's the point? Why bother? Why would I continue? And this is where you kind of see a common thread or the undertone of suicide and self-harm with people who are having some really intense struggles, because that side of them, that's a more spiritually connected side, will feel very hopeless. So a part of me can understand maybe why in the poor education of our churches, why we've combated it to say, well, we just need to pray, we need to pray you through this, and we need to like ask Jesus for deliverance, because there is a hopelessness attached to it. But I almost have wondered if that approach has come from a place of very poor education and a lack of understanding of how to do an holistic approach. Because I think, yes, we need to be praying for our friends and family, but we also need to be approaching how this is impacting their thought life, how this is impacting the way they feel, how this is impacting their behaviors, not just how it's impacting them spiritually, but how is it now hitting us as individuals holistically. And that's the approach we need to be taking as a church and as a society, in my opinion.
That's great. Okay, here's another one for you. Are we seeing more people struggle with mental health now because we are more aware, or are they because the mental health, because of environmental and cultural climates, are increasing? In other words, are the levels of mental health issues increasing, or are we just more aware of what's already was there? Rebecca, what do you think?
I think both. I mean, I don't have statistics for the past, but now when we look at the numbers, especially in Canada, it's like 1 in 5 people experience some sort of mental health problem, whether it's a season or a full, lifetime of struggling with it. I don't know the numbers from the past, but I definitely think both. I think people weren't aware of what mental health was in the past, so the numbers probably would have been higher than we know.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's good. No, I agree with you there. For all I know, I'm not a trained counselor by any stretch. Erica, do you want to take this one from Taylor? Any advice for people who see this issue and are starting support groups?
Starting support groups, that's a really great question. And I think that is a beautiful direction for us to take, especially as a church community. And some of the suggestions that I would have around that, Taylor, would be to, again, look at the person as a holistic individual. So if you are starting a support group, the very first thing we want to do is normalize it. We want to make people who feel like they walk into these groups, hey, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay that this is your struggle. Here is this group of people who have also struggled, to normalize that so that they don't feel more isolated, or they don't feel like, oh, I'm walking into this space as a burden now for these people to like carry me in, because they want to have a sense of like, okay, I'm in common ground here with these people. So the normalizing around that would probably be my first suggestion. The second part would be around, and I'm, kind of leaning more specifically on the depression piece, but you would want to look into kinds of things that are the people's interest. And that will look fairly broad, but that has shown to be one of the key things to help individuals is when they're connected to the spaces of their lives that they have interest in, that bring them joy, that they have excitement around. It can tend to help the mood that they're currently facing. So that may be a little bit of a dance. You might want to have several different options potentially, or maybe have like specific groups for specific kind of interest. But those would be the two things that I would lean towards in a support group kind of setting. That would be for the individual who's experienced. If we're going to think outside to like family support groups, then that's also a very interesting space, because they would actually be the most direct support for the person who's struggling. And oftentimes the family support network, they just need somewhere they can talk openly about what they're experiencing at home or with their loved one, and just not to feel alone in the journey. That's some of the biggest struggle that the families of people who are facing mental health challenges find.
That's really good.
Can I go off of that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to address actually what Jamie said. He said, I think we as pastors need to recognize we're not professional counselors, and recommend professional counseling. And even when it comes to support groups or just for an individual, don't feel shame being a pastor and not having all the answers, because you're not trained to be a counselor, and that's totally fine. There are professional counselors who are Christians who can take the case that you're dealing with, and probably be able to help that person. Or they might know of someone who's running a support group that they can connect them with. So always reach out. Don't feel ashamed that you don't have the answers. You're not meant to be a counselor.
Good. Let's see. Can sadness lead to depression?
I'll tackle this one if that's okay. I think sadness is one of the key indicators that someone is potentially depressed. But when we look at what actually leads to depression, we're looking at, a scale of different factors. We're looking at stress. We're looking at financial issues. We're looking at family situation. We're looking at like the current cultural situation that we're in. We're looking at personal, like maybe even family genetic makeup, for example. We're looking at chemical imbalances. Like, it's the scale of the things that impact depression is quite long and very unique to each one of us as individuals. So sadness is a part of it, but I would hesitate to say that it causes it.
Right. Okay, there's a good comment here from Dwight. Churchgoers have been so conditioned to pretend everything is great. Their Christian walk is awesome. Nothing bothers them. They're not struggling. Admitting they have a problem is akin to admitting that they are a backslider. And I think that's been a lot of our issue in the church with mental health. We don't mind saying we have diabetes, and we don't mind saying we got to go get surgery.
Yeah.
But we don't want to admit that we have depression or we have anxiety or other mental health issues, much let alone something like schizophrenia or quite serious mental illness.
Yeah.
So my hope and prayer is that through conversations like this, the stigma surrounding mental illness, the church should really be leading the way in the community and in the culture at large at getting rid of this stigma. Right now, I think culture is probably outpacing us through things like Bell Let's Talk, which, for what it is, certainly raises awareness. But the church could really be leading in this. Any further thoughts, folks? If you have questions, we're about to transition again. So by all means...
Can I just go off on that comment for a second?
Yes, please do.
And Dwight said churchgoers have been so conditioned to pretend everything is great. And I think that's so true in today's day and age. But when you look at the Bible, were people pretending that everything was great? Like, if you look at Job, was he there like, my life is fine, this is fine? No.
It's all fine.
Like, no one was ever living, this great, perfect Christian walk, even in Bible times. So I don't know why now we feel like we need to put this mask on.
True enough. True enough. Here's a comment from Craig. Erica would know because she went to school with them. Church is not always a safe place to be transparent, especially if you're as a pastor. There's too much pressure placed upon ministers to have it all together. Do you want to touch on that, Erica?
Yeah, I think Craig is absolutely right. Oftentimes, the people who have the greatest struggle to admit that they're struggling are those who are in places of leadership, are those who we would label as helpers. If you're in the pastorate, if you're in counseling, there's this thing that we call helper fatigue. And it's something that's very real amongst the roles and the responsibilities that come with those who find themselves always helping others. And when all of a sudden we're in a space to admit, hey, like, I'm not doing okay, it then becomes quite a stigma where we're seen as failing, or we're seen as weak, or we're seen as not being able to do our job properly, and then they question our ability. So it's a very scary place to be. But again, I think a big piece is the education around that. It's the understanding that we're all just people. We all are doing the best we can with what we have, and none of us are immune to mental illness. None of us are immune to mental challenges. And once we can have a collective understanding of that, then all of a sudden it isn't as big of a shock when the person who you think is untouchable all of a sudden admits and can be vulnerable around, hey, like, I'm struggling.
That's good. Final thought, Rebecca?
I just want to thank you for having this conversation. It's so important. People need to be willing to talk about this, to be honest.
Yeah, I really think so. And let me put a few more comments on here as I'm going. I really believe that this is how we start. We start by talking about it. We start by recognizing that it's a normal part of life. Some mental illness is circumstantial, and that is to say you're going through a time in your life. This is how I do it with students. You're going through a time in your life that's causing you great stress and anxiety. And once you navigate this, your mental health will improve, or your habits are contributing to poor mental health. But for some of you out there, your mental illness or mental health challenges are caused by a chemical imbalance. And you're going to need to go see a medical professional and get that chemical imbalance addressed. So some people can modify their circumstances. Others, the circumstantial piece won't help. You're going to need help from a medical practitioner. For almost everyone, counseling helps. And so happens now that I've taught a couple of counselors, so I got, counselors on standby. But it is good. It is good to bounce things off people who are trained in how to approach these types of things. So I'm really grateful for the two of you. You all know this. I think you're both fantastic. Erica has been at this a long time. Erica was counseling people in youth camp when she was in youth camp. And Rebecca is going to make a wonderful counselor. She's been so intuitive to people's thoughts and needs and feelings and this type of stuff. And I've watched her grow so much in this. And you're probably in your first year, right, of training. So you're going to do great in this too. A couple of more questions. If anyone wants to take this, do you think judgment is what's stopping us from talking about anxiety and depression?
I think it's the fear of judgment for sure. A big piece to our mental health challenge, oftentimes we didn't, and I never got a chance to touch on it, but it's oftentimes our own self-talk. And if you're telling yourself, if I say this, I'm going to be judged, or if I say this, I'm going to sound like a failure. If I say this, people are going to think that I'm. And we oftentimes will create that scenario for our own selves before we even give anybody else a chance to make it for us. So I think it's the fear of judgment oftentimes that will stop us from being honest and vulnerable about how we're actually feeling.
Good.
And you'd be surprised of how people will actually be supportive when you're honest about it.
And surprised about how many people share in the struggle.
Yeah.
Good. I'm trying to keep up with the comments here. Do you want to touch on this one, Rebecca, from your dear buddy Caleb?
I'm not touching on the cultural trend of depression being cool. TikTok is what you mean. That's how I read it. Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if it's so much that people are trying to fit in or if it's the way that they're expressing themselves because they are struggling. They might be sad. Like Erica mentioned, there's a difference in sadness and depression. They might be sad and just trying to make it seem like they're fitting in by calling it depression. When it comes to TikTok, I'm not totally sure about that. I feel old right now. I haven't been on the depression side of TikTok, but yeah, I don't know.
I'll add to that, Rebecca. When it comes to the TikTok world, and this is kind of a separate piece that I've focused a little bit of my professional world in around social media use. And I'm really curious around that in the sense of social media platforms is oftentimes what feels like the safest space for a teenager or a young adult to express themselves on. So anyone who may be outside of some of that cultural norm may look at it and think like, oh, is that becoming a trend, or like, what's up with that? But for a lot of that generation, that is the safest space for them to express themselves. So perhaps it is very genuine and they are looking for support through means like TikTok. But an interesting piece around it is, and we will probably all agree to some level on this, is our current cultural context has become so technology based that we're removing the connection piece out of relationships, where oftentimes a lot of our connections are happening, like, even if there's people in the room with you, you're half in your screen and half with the person who's with you. So we're only getting half connected. And a huge piece to combating mental health challenges is connectedness, is genuine relationship. So when we think about some of the generations that are coming up under us, they are losing the opportunity to gain the tools to know how to connect. So I'm a little bit anxious in my anticipation on how much mental health we are going to see come with the next generation that's behind us, because there's very key things that should be a part of every human being's toolbox that they are missing the opportunity to be able to function in properly. And I think it may lead us in an interesting space with our mental health.
Well, you'll be happy to know people are terribly appreciative. I can't keep up with the comments, and there are questions still coming in. So I'm going to push this a bit further if you can both stay conscious, because I know neither one of you stay up very late. Kim has got a question here, and I don't even know what she's referring to, but one of you probably will. CBT and DBT. Do you know what she means by that? Cognitive behavior therapy, probably.
Yeah, so she's asking a question around like some therapeutic methodologies that, you know, someone like myself and Rebecca would be taught in our masters and in our training kind of setting. The thing around that, and I'm a little bit hesitant when it comes to like offering crash courses on this kind of stuff, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the most appropriate way to implement cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've went to school for 3 years. I've been in it for 5 years. And I'm sure I have tons more to learn around it. And I've come to learn that when you are implementing therapies and you are working with individuals, it becomes so unique to the individual needs, the individual story, the individual's life circumstance, that to kind of do like a blanket, like, here, implement this therapy strategy to help yourself, is a little bit impersonal for me. It helps, I think, in the appropriate context where there's relationship and there's rapport, and someone can work with you and understand exactly where you are on your journey and in your season. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just the first thing I thought of.
I think with cognitive behavioral therapy as well, like you just need to understand that, well, like you said, it's very specific, but it's also like you take your thoughts. It's like training someone to change their thoughts to change their behavior. So it's not the same for anybody, because everybody's thoughts and behavior is totally different.
That's good. I should also give a shout out to my sister if she's watching, Tanya, who's a trained counselor. And many of you would know her probably. She's done a lot of counseling across Newfoundland. And she is another option for you, we do have a number of good counselors in the province right now, and we're producing more, as you can tell. Lauren, you're not an insecure leader. Having Erica and Rebecca being a part of this has enhanced the presentation. Well, Lauren, one of the things I've learned is to try to figure out how much you don't know. And when it comes to this, I don't know. I know how to do mentoring, and I know how to do some coaching, but I'm not a counselor. And so you refer or you bring in specialists, which is what I'm doing here tonight. And the other thing is, you know what? When you've been in my position and you've taught wonderful people like Erica and Rebecca, and then you get to see them go and do the thing that God has called them to, highlighting that is actually just a thrill. There is no reason to be insecure about that, of course, because they're doing what God has called them to. And they're exceptional at it. And so it is only my privilege to highlight them and their ministries and where they're going in life. So, yes, indeed. Well, I thank you, ladies, for having joined me. It's been a great privilege of mine. This was really cool.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I may schedule another one of these on mental health, because there's obviously a lot of interest in it, and bring you back and have another conversation again at some point.
Sounds good.
Thank you both. We'll see you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.
Well, thank you, folks. That was very, very good. I appreciate your paying attention there and the excellent questions that you brought forward. I think that was a very helpful discussion, or at least I hope it was. We're going to transition now, and I'm just going to do a couple of minutes of this to gifts of the Spirit. Yeah, Aaron, that's smart there. It's clear why I consider her your better half. Yes, indeed. Thanks to all. Yeah, I appreciate all of the good comments here. Another session on mental health would be good. Yes, indeed. So let's do a quick transition here now and have a look at spiritual gifts for a few moments. I'm just going to introduce this and then I'll finish it up next week and probably even the week after. You'll see there on your screen, there's actually 4 places where spiritual gifts are taught. And they are in Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and 1 Peter 4. The ones that get all the attention is 1 Corinthians 12, especially the 9. But I wanted you to be aware at the beginning that there's actually 4 different places where gifts are listed. And they include not just what we call the very supernatural gifts like miracles and prophecy and gifts of wisdom and gifts of knowledge and tongues and interpretation and healing and these types of things. There's also the gifts of encouragement, giving, leadership, mercy, service, teaching, these types of things, even administration, which God knows I'm not gifted in. But that is one of the gifts listed. Let me run through a little bit of this for you. What the gifts are, and I've used this list for quite a while. It really captures for me what I believe about the gifts of the Spirit. The gifts are to be eagerly sought. We're to seek the greater gifts, Paul tells us. The gifts, I believe, flow through one believer into another believer. And that is to say, in general, the gifts of the Spirit flow through us. We are like culverts in that sense, more than a well. The gifts, God gives me a gift of a word of wisdom or a word of knowledge to flow through me for the benefit of somebody else. The primary purpose of the gifts is to edify and to build up. They're not to tear down. The gifts are not for straightening people out. They are for edification. They are for the entire body. I believe that all believers should be used in the gifts of the Spirit. And I think right now we probably are not seeing that. Back to our original topic, if we had the saints equipped to do the work of the ministry, I think that in fact we would see maybe more of the gifts of the Spirit in all believers. I think for the most part, the gifts are temporary, especially the gifts of 1 Corinthians 12, which I'll focus on next week. And that is to say, I believe they flow through us. We don't own the gift of wisdom or knowledge or miracles. It's not residing in us. It flows through. And I believe they're subject to judgment and the guidance of spiritual leadership. So we'll see a lot of this when people get moving in the gifts of the Spirit, and all of a sudden there's an arrogance that comes with it. I remember pastoring years ago in a small town, and a person had come in who was having prophetic vision and dreams, and they really believed that they actually came in and said, the Lord told me we never had to listen to the pastors anymore. And see, we never even had to pray about that. And so one of the things I would say about the gifts right off, and I'll circle back around this next week, is that when you begin to move in the gifts of the Spirit, your leadership should see an increased sense of humility about you, because the Spirit himself is humble. And when the Spirit really seizes your life and the Spirit really grabs a hold of you, we should know that because there's an increased sense of humility, not an increased sense of arrogance. And so the gifts will still be subject to the guidance and judgment of spiritual leadership. What the gifts are not about our own individual blessing. They are not meant to correct individuals. I remember growing up in Springdale when people would stand with a word of this or a prophecy, and it would literally limb out certain people in the congregation. And that's not what God intended by any stretch. The word corrects, and that's usually delivered by the shepherd. They're not badges of spirituality, which I think we very often seen in our context, whereby if somebody is regularly used in tongues and interpretation, or somebody has a prophetic gifting, then that's like a badge. Like we consider them very, very spiritual people because they can, speak in tongues in the congregation, but I'll cover that again. And they're not signs of spiritual power or authority over other people. And as I just said, they are not an excuse to become ignorant or arrogant or ignorant. And then finally tonight, I would go back to what I touched on last week, is simply to say that the New Testament measure of spirituality is always by the fruit and never by the gifts. The New Testament. So in other words, if you want to know if you're growing in spirituality, you measure it by the fruit of the Spirit and not by the gifts. So you're looking at things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, and not word of wisdom, word of knowledge, tongues interpretation, prophecy, discernment, working of miracles, and these types of things. So discernment in terms of measuring our spirituality is found in the fruit. That's where we look. We look to the fruit of the Spirit. Now, in the modern charismatic world, that's not what you see. You see that the people who can prophesy today, or the people who can work the wonders or do the healing ministries, they get all of the acclaim. They're the ones getting the TV shows. So you'll get a TV show like Extreme Prophetic, but you never get a TV show on extreme patience. When, as I taught you last week, the fruit of the Spirit is every bit as supernatural as the gifts. It takes just as much Jesus to get us to be patient as to speak a word of wisdom or a word of knowledge or to do a miracle. The fruit are just as supernatural as the gifts, but the fruit abide. The gifts tend to be, especially the Corinthian gifts, as far as we understand, they tend to flow through us for another person. And so let me pull back here. Let's see if we got any questions. Harold says, Pastor George Daw and his daughter Barbara published a very helpful Bible study on the fruit of the Spirit, which balances fruit and gifts. That's good to know. Could there be more or other gifts of the Spirit not on the list? Possibly, because we know that Paul's list in Corinthians 12 is not exhaustive. It wasn't intended to be. But the challenge we have now is figuring out what they would be. So we're probably safer to stick with the list, which is quite extensive as it is. Good question, Joel. If the gifts are temporary, how should we understand career faith healers? The best way I understand that, James, is to simply say that it seems like though the gifts be temporary, God does choose to allow some gifts to be regularly exercised by some people. In other words, for example, when Pastor Hardy Perry was in Springdale, I knew as a child that if there was a message in tongues, Pastor Perry would interpret it. He regularly exercised the gift of interpretation. That was his thing. But I don't believe that every time he heard somebody speak in tongues, he knew what they were saying. But God regularly used him like God regularly used Oral Roberts in healing, for example. I don't believe Oral could heal everybody he came across, but I believe Oral was regularly used in that gift. That's how I understand that. That's a very good question, James. That's typical. Let's see. Jared, would you agree that gifts don't take residence could still be familiar to the saints? Yeah. Well, see, there's two things going on there, Jared. You have the gift of wisdom, which shows up in us for certain times, but then we are also called to grow in wisdom, which is like the fact that we have faith and we're called to grow in faith, but then also that there's a gift of faith given us for specific situations. So wisdom is like that. You can grow in wisdom and you can become very, very wise, but then even people who are not wise can be gifted with wisdom as one of the Corinthian gifts. Let's see. Okay, I'm just reading your comments here. Or the same people who speak in tongues week after week. The tongues one, as I'm going to get into, Dwight, of course, is the most abused of all the gifts, because for Pentecostals and others, it's the sign of their spirit baptism. And so they can speak in tongues as a prayer language. And so they're quite free to get up and speak their prayer language in public, whether or not they actually have the gift of tongues for the assembly. And I'll unpack that a little more. It may not stick for free use all the time, but comes back regularly as needed. That's probably true. That is definitely true. Jamie, that's a good word to Jamie. Harold, I love this. I always wonder. And when it's the one and the same, they interpret. Yes, that's true. Good question. So I think I will stop there with the gifts. And next week, I will pick it up there. And we will get into, in particular, the Corinthian gifts, which is really where I'm going to aim. And that is the list that you're familiar with. A word of wisdom. He gives to another a word of knowledge. He gives discernment and miracles and working of wonders and faith and healing and tongues and interpretation and discernment. And I'm going to work through the Corinthians list there, and then also work through from 1 Corinthians 14 how to use these gifts in the assembly. So this was just a dry run tonight, just to get, I kind of suspected that the mental health piece might go long. And so I thought what I would do is let them go because it was so good, and just introduce this topic of what the gifts are, and then circle around next week and do some more extensive teaching on it. If the Lord is willing, as Uncle Cy Windsor used to say, the Lord willing, and that he is. James, I think many in our congregations are used in certain gifts, but are unaware. I think that's true for certain. James, thanks for that. And we'll certainly pull that up again next week. I think that's actually right. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Joel and Alan, Peggy, Dwight, Roddy, Caleb, Barbara, Gloria, Dwayne. Thanks all. Appreciate you being on. If you think about it, you can find Erica and Rebecca on Facebook and send them a little message on Messenger and thank them for doing such a good job. Thank you, Trudy and Karen and Roberta. Yeah, I think the new format is working well. Thank you, Alvin and Desiree and Monda and Marjorie, Cal and Karen. Great to have you on. Troy, Bram, Beverly, Tina, Hannah. Thank you, Job. Thank you, Valerie. The show grows in wisdom. Well, that's an act of God there, Chad. Thank you, Mark, Andrew, Paul, Janice, Heather, Alexa, Keith, David. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Thank you, Joan, Jody, Audrey. Appreciate it, folks. You're very, very kind. Thank you, folks. Well, we shall hope you have a great week. If you're in Newfoundland, and of course anywhere really, stay safe. And hopefully we'll all get through this soon. Take care of yourselves.